Whispers from Below, a horror podcast by Justin W. Geis. Scary stories, both real and fake. Hello, listeners. Welcome to Season 4, Episode 3 of Whispers from Below, a podcast by a madman for madmen. I'm your resident psychopath, Justin W. Geis, and today's topic of discussion is vampires. Now, before I get into the episode, I do have my usual things to talk about. First of all, this episode is pretty chill. I don't think it's really gonna be super awful or terrible for anybody to listen to. It is a little bit graphic, just because it talks about real life stuff, and I want to put a disclaimer that I did not do a ton of research into any people or real life events or anything like that sort of led to the uprising of vampire history. I more went for the mythological approach, because that's the stuff that interests me more. So if you'd like to hear more about Vlad the Impaler, what's her name? There was a Hungarian queen that bathed in people's blood and stuff like that. If you want to hear more about that kind of stuff, let me know. I can totally do an episode on it. But I chose to go more the mythological route for this episode. But it should be okay for younger listeners. It should be pretty okay. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. So first of all, if you are unaware, a vampire is a humanoid creature that sort of derives its folkloric, I guess, origin from a multitude of different cultures and folklores. But I think that the one vampire that most of us know really well is the European vampire, so Dracula. I mean, that's the biggest reference to make. It's the easiest one to sort of call out of the bunch and be Dracula, that's the vampire that everybody knows. You know what I mean? He's just the most popular. But vampires can actually be found in folklore from all over the world. The sophisticated kind that we know today is from the 19th century Europe. But even before then, we had vampire lore that was sort of popping up from different cultures. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But one thing that I thought was really fascinating was that this sort of belief in a dead human returning from the grave, and then feasting on the blood of those that are alive or whatever, it dates back to a bunch of pre-industrial cultures. And the reason for this is that they were just trying to explain how decomposition worked, but scientifically they didn't have the capability to explain how decomposition worked. So a lot of this research I was just learning about how bodies decompose, and how that sort of led people to believe well, obviously must be a vampire. You know what I mean? Obviously it must be a zombie. And if you go back and listen to my zombie episode, which is in season 1 or 2, I believe, I do an episode on zombies. You should go back and check it out. But a lot of the same sort of myths and legends about zombies and vampires kind of sparked from a similar amount of non-knowledge of decomposition and how the body worked post-mortem. One of the things that led most to it was that the bodies actually get gas trapped inside of them, and it can make the body bloat and look plump. And this can happen to bodies after, even if they've been super skinny in real life, they can get bloated and plump when they're dead. And so it can make it look as though they are fuller and more alive than they have been in the past. And it can make the body look, quote, well fed. So that was very shocking for people to see, when they would exhume a body that had made groaning noises or something like that, which was also from gas just escaping through the mouth or whatever. It can sound like a groan. And so when they would exhume a body that had been groaning, they would often find that it looked like it was well fed, even if it had been a skinny person in real life, which sort of made them believe that it must be feasting at some point. Another thing that happens is blood will ooze from the nose and the mouth occasionally because as the body decomposes, it's full of gas, obviously, which creates pressure in the body, which pushes blood where? Out of the nose and the mouth. So not only were bodies getting exhumed that had been groaning because this air was getting pushed out of the nose and the mouth, but then there would be blood as well. So it was sort of leading them. I mean, honestly, if you saw that, you would be led in the same direction that like they had been feasting on human blood, and like that's how they got there because they didn't have the science, the technology to sort of know that that's just like how the body works. So obviously this led people to believe that vampires existed and that they needed to be killed again because they were extremely vampiric. The body, if stabbed, fun fact, releases blood and gas in the form of a groaning sound or, honestly, a fart. Sometimes it would be released that way. But if it gets stabbed, sometimes blood would ooze out, which would lead them to believe that if it groaned and got stabbed and blood came out, that obviously it was still alive, when really the body had been dead, was dead, is gonna be dead. It's just that they were kind of dumb, and it's not their fault. Like they didn't have the technology. They didn't understand how the human body worked enough to know that they were being dumb. So like, it kind of created this like fascination with vampirism and stuff like that. Another thing that used to happen was that they would believe that you had grown hair or like your fingernails had grown, when really what happens is that the skin and the gums lose fluid. So it looks like your hair, your nails, and your teeth like grow, when in actuality, it's just that more of it is showing because you're like dehydrating, if that makes sense. So like the more of your hair follicle is showing, but that doesn't mean that your hair actually grew. More of your nail is showing, but that's just because your nail bed is like retracting. It's not because the skin is renewing itself. It's because it's deteriorating. People would also like report hearing like sounds and stuff from graves. And so this led to a legend that has kind of been like, historians have kind of like pushed it away and been like, this is most certainly not really a possibility. But the idea of someone being buried prematurely, and then sort of like surviving in the grave for a little bit and then dying because they were buried prematurely. What doesn't really make sense with this is that it doesn't make sense as to why then, how did they survive for that long, with just water, without water and food, like with just air. And then the air would obviously only be encapsulated in the coffin, and the coffins are not like airtight. So like obviously that air is going to escape, which means that they lose oxygen. Like it just doesn't like quite add up. But there are like stories of people hearing sounds from a coffin. They would exhume the body and find scratch marks on the inside of the coffin as though someone had like tried to like climb out. But again, like it's not a very like scientifically sound theory. The more sound scientific theory is that gas was just escaping from the bodies, and that's what created the groaning sounds, which in my zombie episode, I believe I talk about a similar thing where people thought that those were rising from the dead because they heard the groaning sounds, which was just gas like escaping the bodies. I know that that's kind of like morbid to start out on, but I think it kind of enforces the idea that like people just didn't know enough to know better. Does that make sense? I feel like that's an idea that isn't talked about enough in like most topics. The idea of like genuinely not knowing enough about a topic to know better. Like if you're not educated on a topic, then you can't know that you're incorrect. If you don't know math, you don't know that 2 + 2 = 4. You know what I mean? Like, so just an idea to keep in mind as we sort of like progress through this is like people just didn't know better about vampires. I know it sounds like a ridiculous concept, but like people just, they believed that was a thing because this is what was presented to them. A bloated body with blood surrounding its mouth that groaned. Yeah, I would think it was alive too. You know what I mean? Like, obviously we thought it was alive. How could we not think that it was alive? Um, Another theory was that rabies might have been linked with certain myths surrounding vampires, vampiric folklore. Garlic and light sensitivity is really common in those that suffer from rabies. You become like hypersensitive to those things, and it can actually lead you like into insanity, and you can bite other people. And then you foam at the mouth, but it's like a bloody sort of foam. Um, and two animals that are most commonly associated with rabies at the time were wolves and bats, which are the two animals that are associated with vampires. So it could have a general connection. I'm not like entirely sure how like sound that one is scientifically, if like rabies was like super common or anything like that. But I do know that like those things are true, and they make sense to me that like, oh, that would make sense why people would like associate that with vampirism. And then like obviously the exhumed bodies, it all kind of like makes sense to me. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy. Let me know. But I think that that all kind of like makes sense. And it can also, this is the other thing. I'm so sorry I forgot this. It can stop your sleeping patterns from being normal. So it can make you nocturnal is the other thing that rabies can do. It knocks your sleep out of whack, which is just yet another like chef's kiss, like icing on the cake, sort of seal the deal moment of like, of course this would be associated with vampires. There have actually been serial killers that called themselves vampires or were called vampires because they would drink the blood of their victims. I was going to say the blood of their enemies, as though this was like Mortal Kombat or like Game of Thrones or some shit. But they would drink the blood of their victims or something like that, or drain the blood somehow. So they would be known as like vampires. There's an unsolved crime in Stockholm of a murder where blood was just like completely drained from the body, and like it's unsolved. Like nobody knows like who did it or like what happened. Which is like such a scary thought. But that sort of, again, like feeds into this myth of like vampires have to be real, obviously, because otherwise how would something like this happen, you know? I don't know about you, but I personally hate having to go to the grocery store. It takes up so much of my day when I could be starting a new hobby with that time, like soap carving, or collecting the sick bags out of airplanes. With Instacart, it makes grocery shopping fast and easy, all while allowing me to stay in my underwear. Instacart allows you to order all of the things you usually get from your local stores, delivered to your door in as fast as 1 hour. Not only that, but it will also give you smart suggestions for new items based off of your preferences, as well as highlight deals to help you save some money. The shoppers handpick perfect produce and make sure that your eggs get to you safely. You can get free delivery on your first order over $35 by following the link in the show notes. This also lets Instacart know that we sent you, and it helps support Whispers from Below. So if you hate grocery shopping as much as I do, try Instacart today and enjoy getting your groceries the easy way. Though not strictly vampires, there are a couple like mythological things that sort of fed into this belief of a vampire and sort of helped create the westernized version that we know today. One of which is the goddess Sekhmet in Egypt, or ghouls in Arabia. These two were sort of like blood drinking, feasting gods that were not very nice. Hebrews had Lilith, who drank the blood of babies. Ancient Greece had Lamia, who was Zeus's secret lover. And then when Hera found out, she was like, hell no. And she murdered all of her offspring and just like killed all of Lamia's children, which sent her obviously into like a huge rage. And now Lamia drinks the blood of children. Greece also had Empusa, who was the daughter of the goddess Hecate. Apologies if I'm saying that incorrectly. Hecate is often associated with like nighttime, witches, necromancy, things like that. Empusa would seduce men, then drink their blood in their sleep. So like you're seeing in all of these cultures, there's sort of a blood drinking aspect that feeds into the vampire lore. There's always something to do with children too. And it's interesting to note that in like Bram Stoker's Dracula, there is like a whole section where, spoilers if you like don't know that story, but like Lucy is like drinking the blood of children at night. So she's sort of replicating Lilith in this sense, and they both have like an L name that's very pretty. So it's sort of, I was just about to say vibey. It's not vibey. It's not at all vibey. Literally murdering children is not is not vibey. Wow, my brain is messed up. But it sort of like enforces this idea. A couple other interesting ones. I just wrote down a bunch of interesting ones that I thought were like really fascinating to me. In Africa, they have different depictions, but a lot of them involve taking the form of animals and living in trees, which I thought was really important to note because this is sort of the first time that you're seeing the shape-shifting aspect of it come into play. So like we don't really see that in other cultures until Africa, where it was like one of them turns into a firefly and sucks blood at night, sort of, I mean, a mosquito if we're being like real, but a firefly. And then one of them, he turns into like a giant bat basically and like lives in a tree. So there's stuff like that. In Australia, I believe they have a myth of sort of like this giant bat creature that like lives in the trees and like snatches people up and eats them. So you sort of see more animalistic interpretations. And then in the Philippines, they have a creature that takes the form of a beautiful woman by day, and then at night it detaches its upper body with these huge like bat wings, and then uses its long tongue to suck the blood of pregnant women. So again, there's this reinforcement idea of sucking the blood of like children or like a fetus. Like that seems to be a common theme in a lot of these, and I'm not entirely sure why. I bet it has something to do with like the youthful blood of like a child. Like they're so innocent and their blood is like fresh. Fresh is probably what it is. That makes sense to me. The idea of like fresh blood, like it's new on this planet. It hasn't been pumping for a while. It's not full of disease and stuff yet. So that's probably why a lot of it is focused around children. That like just clicked in my head and like makes sense to me. Let me know if that's just me being crazy and manic. Japan had a snake woman that feasts on blood called the Nureona. Nureona probably is how they say it. But if you are interested in that, there's a lot of info on like Japanese snake women, and it's kind of all really scary. So if you're interested at all in me doing episodes on just like myths or gods and goddesses of like decay and stuff like that, please let me know, because I love mythology. Like if you want me to do an episode on Sekhmet and ghouls and Lilith and stuff like that, just let me know, because I'm totally down to do episodes like that. But these are all just basically bases for the modern day Dracula and sort of the Dracula-esque vampires that we know today. I will say one thing that I noted that I thought was interesting was I read one article that talked about the political, like, cartoony aspect of what a vampire is, because it's this big, overbearing presence in a town without actually doing anything. It's just one rich dude, only comes out at night and feasts on peasants. And so there's this sort of underlying political message that goes along with the Dracula-esque vampire, which I just thought was like a very interesting thing to note, because I feel like that could be part of the reason why it was created, was as more of a political statement as well. Like Bram Stoker's Dracula, I think, is the most like quintessential vampire novel that's like ever been written. Like that's what people base vampires on today. Like that's what people use. And so I think him especially used a lot of political sort of like talk and ideals in his writing. So I think that vampires also have a very political place in the world, which is just like such a crazy weird thing to say, but like it kind of makes sense. I mean, back then that was like a political statement to say that. And I think that you can still do something like that today with vampires, whatever. That's my 2 cents on it. I just thought that that was an interesting thing to note. But as we all know, I mean, vampires are extremely popular in culture today. We've got Twilight, True Blood, the originals, they're in Supernatural. So many TV shows have vampires. Sly Cooper 3, which Honor Among Thieves, which is one of my favorite video games of all time. I love the Sly Cooper series. If anyone wants to buy me a replica Sly Cooper cane, I would literally make out with you. Like I would die for that. I think that is just, I need to look up if someone's made that on Etsy because now I need that. Sly Cooper is just like one of my favorite all-time series ever and ever and ever. I've played each game at least like 10 to 15 times. I have an issue. I love them so much. But in the third one, it features the Jiangshi, which is actually an old form of like Chinese vampire zombie combined. And it's just really interesting to see that like even a children's video game like that took like Jiangshi and made it into something that's like palatable for like kids. But it took like that traditional folklore, and the main thing that it took that I remember distinctly from the game is that they hop. They don't walk anywhere. They all hop. None of them walk. It's all done by hopping. And the fact that that was like a point that they made in the game to really like showcase that they were hopping instead of walking, I remember that. And so that's just an interesting thing to note. I don't know. I think it's kind of cool. Dracula has been used in Castlevania, just like the actual name Dracula or Alucard or anything sort of relating to it has been used in video games like across the board, and like in any sort of vampire-esque imagery, Dracula's name comes up. Any sort of Victorian imagery, Dracula's name comes up. It's one of the classic movie monsters is Dracula, like Nosferatu. Like that sort of thing is just so popular and common. Like I don't even know how we all know Dracula. Because like have I ever seen like the traditional like black and white Dracula movies? Like I don't think I ever have. But for some reason I know exactly what it looks like. It's just like such a staple in our lives at this point. Vampires are such a staple. They're not going anywhere, and they're not going to go anywhere because it's a cool myth when you really think about it. It's really cool. It's a sick concept, and that's why we're so drawn to it, you know? Any pale Victorian person is basically considered a vampire, which means I'm like right up there. I call myself a vampire all the time because I will stay up like all night doing whatever, and I'm super duper pale. I don't really like the sunlight. The only thing that doesn't track is that I love garlic. I absolutely love garlic. It's the one thing that doesn't track. And unfortunately, I do have a reflection. I see myself quite frequently in the mirror, actually. But I don't know. It's like, oh, she's a vampire, or like that kid's a vampire. Like that's a thing that people like say. I don't know. Maybe that was just me. Maybe I'm the weird one. Let me know if I'm the weird one here. But the other thing is that this could be a whole other episode. So let me know if you're interested in this. But there are modern day vampires. It has a lot to do with like blood rituals and blood play and stuff like that. So if you are at all interested in hearing more about modern day vampire culture and how that works, it's kind of like a cult. Let me know, because it was just like too much info to pack into like the end portion of this episode. But if you would like to learn more, please let me know, because I'm definitely willing to learn more about it. It was just like a lot of info at the end of the episode that I was like, I can't throw this all in here. This is far too much information to just throw at everybody right at the end. So if you want to hear more, let me know. That sort of segues me into the end of the episode. I don't really have much else to say except if you guys have episode ideas, please send them to me. I love hearing your episode ideas and I love doing them and I shout you out and it's super fun. So let me know. You can either DM me on Instagram, which is whispers from below, no spaces, no capitals, no underscores, no nothing. Or you can do it on my website. There's a contact page, which is whispersfrombelow.com. You can contact me there. You can shoot me a DM on my like main account as well. I probably will be less likely to respond there than I will on the Whispers from Below account, but you can still do it and like shoot your shot and see if I bite or whatever. And the very last thing I wanted to talk about today was the Patreon. I am currently just looking to get like 25 people to, be patrons. That's like all I'm really looking for right now. It can even be just at like the $5 tier. But I would just like really love to get some patrons on that Patreon page. I've got a lot of really cool rewards set up. One of them, I believe there's 5 tiers, 5, 10, 25, 50, and 100. And the $100 tier features like a t-shirt, customized stickers, a water bottle that's customized to you, special stuff that you can only get by being a patron. And I just think that that's really cool and really special. So if you guys are at all interested in stuff like that, please go check out the Patreon. It's patreon.com/whispersfrombelow. Go check it out. I also did all the artwork for each tier. I like actually hand drew it, not like by hand, but like digitally drew it. And I think it turned out pretty okay considering I'm not good at drawing. I'm really proud of a couple of the tiers and how they look. So yeah, go take a look. I put a lot of effort into it and I would love to get some patrons. But other than that, remember, vampires are a staple and they ain't going nowhere, nowhere. I might actually be a vampire myself. And thirdly, if you can, go get vaccinated. I want to do theater again, please.